Sometimes, trust doesn't arrive on horseback or with roses in hand. Sometimes, it walks uphill in the cold, soaked in silence, and waits on a porch that never asked for company. This story begins in the town of Dry Creek, where a woman who lost everything chose the mountains over people, and where a weary sheriff knocked on her door, not for law or love, but for something humbler, a bowl of soup. Dry Creek wasn't a proper town, not anymore. 3 buildings had half their roofs caved in, the saloon opened when it pleased, and the general store didn't carry thread anymore, just canned milk and dust. The schoolhouse bell hadn't rung in 3 winters, but folks still lived here. They had to. The wind tore down from the northern cliffs like a warning, always a bit louder come nightfall. And when it wasn't the wind, it was the coughing. That deep, hollow sound coming from porches and back rooms. Dry Creek had fallen sick, and stayed sick. That was the shape of the place when Sheriff Nathaniel Holt arrived. He rode in without much noise. Just a single horse, 1 saddlebag, and a coat full of road dust. The gold star he wore wasn't pinned outside. It stayed hidden under his coat like something earned too late. People stared. Some nodded. Nobody welcomed him. He spent the first week just walking, mapping streets, checking which buildings still had walls, who had water, who had kids. He didn't ask for help. He just showed up, carried water for the old woman near the church, fixed the latch on the livery barn, helped bury a man nobody claimed. And every day, he heard her name. Mountain woman's got stew thick enough to fix your lungs. Hannah Keene. She don't cook for free, Sheriff. Don't waste your boots. She keeps to herself. Rifle always loaded. He didn't listen at first, but then the coughing got worse. A boy named Eli collapsed outside the smithy. 2 more kids hadn't eaten in 2 days, and the last woman who knew how to boil anything without burning it had packed up months ago. So one morning, Nathaniel rode uphill. The road wasn't a road, not really. Just 2 worn tracks between fir trees, half buried under frost. The cold bit sharper as he climbed, and the clouds hung low, threatening snow again. At the edge of the forest, where stone met sky, sat a small cottage. Rough, beautiful in a way that wasn't trying to be. Wood smoke curled from the chimney. A pile of chopped logs sat perfectly stacked. A mule brayed once, then fell quiet. And in the doorway stood a woman, her hands steady, her eyes unreadable, and her rifle pointed straight at him. "Name's Holt," he said simply. "Sheriff." She didn't lower the gun. "You're early." That caught him off guard. Early for what? The next man trying to convince me I owe this town something. Her voice wasn't cruel. It was flat, balanced, like someone weighing every word. He nodded once, careful not to step forward. "I'm not here to beg," he said. "Just here to ask." She shifted slightly, the rifle still cradled with practiced ease. "Ask what?" "There's sick folks down there. Kids. They need warm food. I heard you know how to make it." She stared at him for a long time. Her face didn't move. Behind her, inside the cottage, he could smell something rich. Onions, meat, herbs. The kind of meal people remember even after the bowl's empty. Then she said it, sharp and sure. "I don't cook for free, Sheriff." Not bitter, just true. Nathaniel didn't flinch. He looked around, took in the view, the open sky, the pine, the silence. "Fair enough," he replied. "What do you cook for?" She didn't answer. The wind moved between them. Cold, honest. Finally, she spoke again. "I'm Hannah Keene. I used to teach children how to spell words like please and thank you. You know how many people remembered those words after my husband died?" Nathaniel said nothing, just stood there, listening. "One," she continued, "and she was 6 years old." She lowered the rifle, just slightly, and stepped back. "I'm not unkind, but I've been fed too many empty thank yous. I'm not opening my kitchen to more." Nathaniel tipped his hat. Understood. He turned without argument, walked back to his horse, and rode down without another word. Hannah watched until the trees swallowed him. The next day, he came again. He didn't knock, just left a bundle of firewood by her gate. 2 days later, a spool of thread and a tin of lard. Then, 3 days after that, a worn stovepipe elbow, newly patched. No requests, no notes, just small offerings, like someone saying sorry without speaking. The townsfolk noticed too. Sheriff's wasting his time. She won't feed him either. Maybe he's sweet on her. Nathaniel ignored them. He just kept going up that mountain. Sometimes with supplies, sometimes just to stand there while the wind howled and she said nothing at all. And one night, after the snow cleared and the air smelled like wood smoke again, he sat quietly on her porch, hands raw from chopping. The door creaked open. She didn't say a word, just placed a bowl of steaming stew on the step beside him and went back inside. He didn't smile, didn't thank her. He just sat there in the cold, eating slowly as the stars came out over Dry Creek. The next morning, Sheriff Holt returned to the cottage. Again. He didn't bring tools this time. No thread, no lard, no stovepipe, only a quiet man's presence, a slow knock on the doorframe, and a second of hesitation. Hannah didn't answer, but the door was open a crack, and from inside, he heard the soft clink of metal against iron. Cooking. He waited. 5 minutes, maybe more, then turned and left a single note on a folded cloth. No thank you. Just, good stew. That was it. 2 days passed before he climbed the trail again. This time, she was outside, mending a section of the fence that held her mules in. Her sleeves rolled up, chestnut hair tied back, loose strands whipping in the wind. She didn't look up when he approached. Fence leaning west, she muttered, half to herself. Snow's melting fast. Nathaniel dropped his satchel and began pulling the post straighter without asking. She didn't stop him. They worked in silence. Her hands were stronger than his. He noticed that. Calloused but precise. When she tied the wire, it stayed tied. When she hammered, the nail stayed sunk. Finally, she glanced over. You got any land back east, Sheriff? Had. Family land. Gone now. War. Mostly. She nodded once. Like that explained enough. Another beat of silence. You fix things like someone who's been broken, she said, eyes still on the post. He looked at her, really looked. There was no smile on her lips, just quiet observation. You see a lot up here, he said. Enough to know who means it. They finished the fence. She didn't invite him in, but she handed him half a biscuit wrapped in cloth. No words. Just a dry, butterless biscuit. He took it like it was gold. That week, something changed. Folks in Dry Creek noticed she'd begun appearing in town again, twice, sometimes 3 times a week. Quiet as ever. Mule cart loaded with sealed pots and bread wrapped in cloth. She'd walk straight to the small shack near the general store, where the sick were laid up, and leave the food. No payment. No announcements. Just stew and cornbread and a flicker of warmth. Children started watching her differently. Some followed her mule cart with wide eyes. One brave girl, about 6, called out, Your stew made my mama stop coughing. Hannah froze. Her back stiffened, but her head dipped once. That was her version of a thank you. And across the street, leaning against a post, Sheriff Holt just watched. Not smiling, not interfering, just seeing her. One evening, as the first buds of spring barely poked out of the frozen soil, Nathaniel showed up on her porch again. This time, carrying a battered tin box. She eyed it as she opened the door. What's that? Seeds. She raised an eyebrow. You brought me seeds. Dry Creek's gonna need gardens. Folks need to stop relying on trade wagons. Figured you might know soil better than anyone. She opened the box. Inside, carrot, turnip, spinach, a few wildflower seeds tucked in the corner like a secret. Her expression didn't change, but she stepped aside. "You can come in. Stove's hot." That was the first time he crossed her threshold. Inside, the cottage was small but lived in. A stone hearth, a table with only one chair, walls lined with herbs, knives, and jars. It didn't feel lonely, just self-sufficient. She ladled stew into a bowl without asking his taste, set it down, poured herself a mug of tea and leaned against the counter, watching him eat. "You always come back," she said softly. He swallowed, then set the spoon down. "You always leave the door unlocked." They didn't say anything for a while. Then she asked, suddenly, "What did you lose?" He blinked. "What?" "You've got the eyes of a man who left something behind and never said goodbye." He didn't answer right away. Looked into the fire instead. "A brother," he said. "And a woman I almost married. One went off to fight. The other didn't wait." Her voice was even. "The brother or the woman?" Nathaniel cracked the smallest smile. "Both." And then she did something unexpected. She poured him a second bowl of stew. "You've earned this one," she said quietly. Not a joke. Not a flirt. Just truth, spoken in the quiet mountain way she lived by. Later that night, as he left, he glanced back from the gate. She was standing in the doorway. No rifle. Just arms crossed, chestnut hair whipping in the wind, watching him disappear into the dark. He didn't wave. She wouldn't have, either. But something unspoken had passed between them. Not love. Not yet. But trust. The first sliver of it. And in a place like Dry Creek, that was as rare as spring flowers in snow. By April, Dry Creek had begun to change. Not in grand ways, not with buildings raised or banners flown, but in subtle movements. Children started showing up again near the schoolhouse steps. The old preacher began carving benches out of scrap wood, and the widow Ruth, who hadn't left her home in nearly a year, stepped out one afternoon just to sit in the sunlight. People said it was the sheriff's doing, but in hushed voices, they also gave credit to the woman from the ridge, the one who never smiled, but never let anyone go hungry again. Hannah Keene didn't ask for thanks. She just brought food when needed. And every now and then, when she caught Nathaniel's eye across town, she gave the smallest nod, like saying, "Still hey, still watching." Then came the meltstorm. Spring always came too hard to Dry Creek. Not a gentle thaw, but a sudden roaring rise of river water and broken snowfields. One night, the clouds let loose like a dam cracked open. Thunder rolled in like cannon fire. Trees bent. Mules screamed in barns. And the next morning, the townsfolk woke to silence and panic. The main bridge, the only one connecting the northern ridge to the rest of town, had collapsed. Wood washed downstream. 2 homes cut off. And worse, 5 children, who had gone to play near the far woods the day before, were now trapped across the gorge. The river below raged wild. No way to swim them out. No ferry. No ropes long enough. Nathaniel took charge fast. He gathered men, checked maps, shouted across the water with cupped hands to calm the children, told them to stay together, stay warm, wait. But no one in town knew the back pass, except one person. An hour later, he was back on the mountain. Rain slicked his coat, mud caked his boots. His hat hung by a string down his back, forgotten in the wind. He didn't knock this time. He stood in front of her door, chest rising with each breath, rain sliding down his face like tears he didn't have time to shed. She opened the door slowly, no rifle in hand. Just Hannah, damp hair braided back, boots already laced, expression unreadable. He didn't speak for a moment. Then, voice hoarse, "Hannah, this ain't a demand. This is me asking. Because I know you care." She stared at him. A pause. Then a quiet, clear voice. "You finally figured it out, didn't you?" "Figured what?" he asked. that I never hated this town. I just got tired of feeding people who only took. Nathaniel swallowed. I'm not here to take. Those kids need someone who knows the way. Another long moment passed. Then, without a word, she turned back into the house. When she reappeared, she was already pulling on a coat, tying it tight. She grabbed a canvas satchel, rope, herbs, a flask of broth. Efficient. Experienced. She met his eyes only once. Help me hitch the mule. They rode out together, her in the lead, him right behind. The back pass wasn't marked. It was an old miner's trail, long overgrown. Hannah had cleared it herself over years, little by little, as insurance. She didn't explain how she knew the way. She just did. The path narrowed. Branches clawed at their coats. A sharp slope dropped on one side. But her mule kept steady, and Nathaniel never once asked how much farther. After 2 hours, they came around the bend, and saw them. 5 children, huddled beneath a split pine. Cold but unharmed. The smallest one ran forward, shouting, "It's the stew lady." Nathaniel blinked, surprised. Hannah only muttered, "Keep your boots dry, Sheriff. Riv'll suck you in faster than guilt." They loaded the children into the cart, 2 at a time, rode them down the back path in slow, careful runs. It took 3 hours, but they made it. By sundown, all 5 were back on town soil. Parents cried, neighbors hugged, and Hannah, mud-streaked, coat torn, hands raw, just stood to the side, brushing her mule. Nathaniel stepped up beside her. "They'll remember this, you know." "I hope they remember who brought the cat," she said dryly. He chuckled. "They already call you the stew lady. You want something fancier." She turned to him, and for the first time in weeks, she smiled. Just a flicker, but real. "I think I'm fine just being Hannah." Later that night, back at her cottage, she made soup, not stew. Something simpler, lighter, broth and roots, soft bread on the side. Nathaniel sat at the table, drying his coat by the fire. He looked up as she set the bowl down in front of him. Still didn't speak. She poured one for herself, sat down across from him. Steam rose between them. Rain still whispered on the roof. And then, after a long silence, he said, "How much do I owe you?" She looked at him, long and calm. Then, with the softest smirk, "Sit down, Sheriff. You've earned this one." For the first time in years, Hannah kept a second bowl on the shelf. She didn't say why, didn't explain it to herself, but there it sat, right above the hearth, clean, waiting. Nathaniel didn't come every night. Sometimes 3 days would pass before she saw him again. Once, nearly a week. But whenever he returned, she'd already set water to boil. Not out of routine, but because she missed him. The town changed again that month. The schoolhouse reopened. Not full days, just mornings. Someone had fixed the bell. A new teacher arrived, a shy girl from Jackson with ink-stained fingers and a nervous smile. Hannah helped once. She brought extra chalk and blank slates she'd saved from her teaching days. Handed them over without a word. The new teacher had tears in her eyes. Hannah just nodded and left. Nathaniel saw the whole thing from across the street. That night, he showed up with a small book in his coat pocket, Leaves of Grass, and asked, softly, "You ever miss it?" Hannah didn't answer right away. Then, "Sometimes I still dream I'm in the classroom, chalk in hand, board full of words. Then I blink, and the room's empty again." He nodded. "That's how I feel when I look at a map. I still trace places I'll never go." She turned toward him. "Why'd you really come west, Nathaniel?" His eyes stayed on the fire. "Because the East kept telling me who I had to be. Out, hey, no one tells you anything." The next morning, he came earlier than usual. Brought her 2 chickens and a basket of potatoes. "They are not a bribe," he said. "Just a thank you for the bridge run and the soup." She raised an eyebrow. You trying to pay off all your debts at once, Sheriff? He grinned. Not debts. Just gratitude. She accepted the chickens, reluctantly. That night, she roasted one, packed the other in salt, made biscuits and fresh gravy. And when he walked through the door, she didn't just serve him soup. She served him dinner. The meals grew longer. He stayed later. Sometimes he'd bring her small things. A comb, a jar of preserved lemons, once even a half-worn deck of playing cards. She never asked where he found them. She started leaving the door unlatched when the weather was good. Then one night, it happened. Not an argument. Not a storm. Just silence. The kind that sits heavy, waiting to crack. They were eating in near-dark, candles low. Outside, wind brushed the trees in soft waves. He'd brought her a new book, the almanac, and laid it on the table. She ran her fingers over the spine, then said, quietly, "You planning on staying, Nathaniel?" He looked up, surprised. "Hey, in Dry Creek." She nodded. "I've seen men like you," she said. "Come out here to fix things. Patch roofs, quiet the saloon, then ride on, back to something else. I don't need another half-stayer." He put down his spoon. "Hannah, I'm not riding on. I don't have somewhere else." She studied him, expression tight. "Then why haven't you asked to stay?" He hesitated. "Because I didn't know if I was welcome." She looked down at her hands. Calloused, strong, unmoving. "I've lived too long with only myself. I don't know how to make space without giving up who I am." He leaned in, voice low. "Then don't give anything up. Just let me sit beside it." The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was warm. She reached out, slowly, and placed her hand over his. It wasn't a kiss. It wasn't a promise. But it was the first thing that felt permanent. The next few weeks were softer. She taught him how to tend her little garden patch. Onions, spinach, even a few stubborn carrots. He taught her how to sand the stock of her rifle smoother. Said, with a grin, "Figured it deserved some respect, considering it greeted me more than once." They didn't speak of love, but it was in the way he poured her tea without asking how she liked it, in the way she left extra jam at the edge of his biscuit, in the way their silences no longer needed filling. One morning, Nathaniel asked if he could bring a bed frame from town, one with enough space for two. Hannah didn't answer right away. Then she said, "Not yet, but maybe soon." That evening, she found something strange. A letter on her porch, folded once. No name on the front. Inside, in simple handwriting, "They are going to vote to replace him. Town council's whispering. They think he's too quiet. Not tough enough. Just thought you should know." No signature. She read it twice. Then, with hands slightly trembling, she sat down by the hearth and stared at the second bowl on the shelf. She didn't cry. But she didn't cook that night either. They said he was too soft to be sheriff. Said she was too cold to be loved. But they didn't see him rebuilding Dry Creek one nail at a time. Or her feeding strangers with hands that once shook with grief. Now, one letter could end everything. Unless two people who never asked for much finally ask for each other. This is how a mountain woman learned to let someone stay. And how a sheriff proved he already had. The letter sat unopened the next morning. Though she'd read it twice, it still sat there on her kitchen table, like a guest who wouldn't leave. They were going to vote him out. Sheriff Nathaniel Holt. Too gentle, too patient, too quiet for a place like Dry Creek. They wanted someone louder, flashier, a man who could swing his badge like a hammer. Hannah stirred the fire slower than usual. Her hands moved automatically. Chop, salt, stir. But her mind kept drifting to him. To the slow way he walked. To the way he never raised his voice. To the way he saw her, really saw her, even when no one else had. She didn't know what she'd say when he showed up. But he didn't. Not that day. Not the next. Not the one after that. 3 days passed. She kept the door unlatched, kept the second bowl clean. But the trail stayed empty. No knock, no mule hoof, no voice in the wind. On the 4th day, Hannah rode down the mountain. She didn't bring stew, didn't bring goods, just herself, coat buttoned to the neck, hair pulled tight, boots firm. The town looked restless. Something buzzed in the air, like a storm that hadn't cracked open yet. She went straight to the old meeting hall. Inside, half the town was gathered. The general store clerk, the preacher, the councilman, and in the corner, standing calm despite it all, Nathaniel. His coat looked more worn than usual. Hat pulled low, star badge polished but dull in the lamplight. They were halfway through the vote when Hannah stepped forward. The room quieted. She didn't ask permission to speak. She just did. If you throw him out, you'll lose the only man in this town who listens before speaking. Murmurs. One man shifted uncomfortably. You want a sheriff who shouts? Sure, there are plenty. You want one who actually shows up in the rain with rope and stew and patience? That man's rare. All eyes on her now. Even his. She turned to look at Nathaniel. His eyes, steel blue, tired as always, met hers. But this time, she saw fear behind them. Not fear of losing the badge. Fear of losing her. She spoke softer now. His earned more than just a title. His earned a place. A pause. And I'd like him to stay. Not as sheriff, if you don't want him, but as mine. The silence after that was heavier than any storm cloud. Then, one voice near the back. Let the man speak. Nathaniel stepped forward, removed his hat, looked right at Hannah. I didn't stay here for the badge, he said. I stayed because a woman up on a ridge taught me how to live again. Then he turned to the council. If you don't want me, I'll go. But I'm not going far. The vote didn't go through. Dry Creek kept its sheriff. But more importantly, Hannah kept what she never thought she'd want again. Company. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the pines, she was back at the cottage. No coat now. Just her hands, her stove, and that second bowl, finally filled again. She heard the knock this time. Not at the door, at the gate. When she stepped out, he was standing there, hat in hand, shirt sleeves rolled, same soft look on his face. Still don't cook for free? He asked. She stepped forward, slow but sure. No, she said, but I don't charge men who stay. He smiled, tired but real. Then I guess I'll unpack my things. A few months later, the schoolhouse held a town gathering. There was music, pie, dancing. Nathaniel stood near the door, leaning against the wall like always. Hannah stood beside him, arms crossed, watching children run across the grass. He leaned over, voice quiet. You ever think about building a table that seats more than two? She looked at him, didn't smile, but her voice was softer than he'd ever heard it. Maybe one day. He nodded. I'll chop the wood. In Dry Creek, they never had a wedding. No white dress. No vows. But everyone knew. He never left her mountain again. And she never locked the door. And once, years later, when a new teacher asked how they met, the children just laughed and said, she told him she doesn't cook for free. And he showed up anyway.